polio is a virus that destroys motor neurons in the central nervous system. And you can go into all kinds of research to find out more about that. But depending on where it affects the spine, if it's below the neck, it would normally cause paralysis if a person did experience paralysis in the legs and the arms. If it was further up in the brainstem, it would involve bulbar polio, which in the next slide, we have a picture of a lot of iron lungs that were so prevalent when people were having polio, and only 2%, I believe, ended up in iron lungs, but many of the wards and hospitals were just totally flooded with these. And of course, there's still one there was an article, I think, in the Queen's Journal about one of them still being found at the hospital here in Kingston, which is where I live. And by the way, I do have a connection to Brantford because I spent the longest as a child. We moved a lot because my dad was with the bank, but my longest time was in Brantford, which was 4 years. And so 2% of people would get bulbar polio. But what I want to mention, and it's important, if you run into anyone who's had polio but has not had paralysis, is to really caution them not to overdo it, because we tend to be these AAA people, because a lot of people had polio and had some effect in terms of their nerves, but not enough to cause that paralysis. I have a friend who now has later weakness, and we'll talk more about post-polio syndrome as well, but she never had any paralysis at all. And the other thing to be aware of, I found this just this last week when I was doing more research, as I'm always doing on polio, and it was fascinating because the connection with COVID-19 with asymptomatic people carrying the virus, for every one person that had paralysis, there could be between 2,000 and 3,000 others who were actually carrying the virus. So there's a lot of similarities, and I really applaud Tara for looking into that, into these topics. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on my illness and so on, but I'm going to mention a little bit about it. But before I get there, there are many famous people who've had polio, and you look at the names. I'm not going to read them all out. You can see them there globally, as well as many Canadians, and including Paul Martin Sr. and Jr. They both had polio, and the March of Dimes has usually an annual event in memory of Paul Martin Sr. Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, she's just recuperating, from what I understand, from I think it was a brain injury, and is again getting some rehabilitation. So David Onnelly, our Lieutenant Governor, a former Lieutenant Governor, also had polio, and I'm going to show you a picture of him in a moment. Thank you. Just to put it into my situation into history, it was 1953, which was one of the biggest epidemics with polio, sort of after the 45, 47. There was a bit of a lull, and then 53 hit, and we had 8,800 cases in Canada, and 500 died. And that used to seem like a huge amount of people until, again, COVID. In Ontario had a large number of those, obviously, from the number there. And I was admitted into Sick Kids Hospital. I had a fever. It was about a 4-day thing where I had first a bit of sore throat fever, and my neck started to hurt, and then my legs. Apparently, I asked my mother, "How did you know I had polio?" And she said, "I woke up screaming, holding on to my legs." And the medical report showed it when I went into the hospital, into Sick Kids, that they couldn't touch my legs. So I never realized how extreme the pain would have been, but that's what happened. And it was one particular leg. Both of them were affected, but one particular one at that time. After about 12 days, I was transferred to Thistletown. In a moment, I'll show you the picture of Thistletown and describe a little bit about what is involved there. And then I was so fortunate not to have to stay there that long. I was out by the end of October. Some people had to stay in Thistletown a year and a half. and then go on to other facilities such as Warm Springs in Georgia, USA, for another 2 years. So I was very fortunate. Thank you. Here I am in 1953. My grandfather was in Brockville. This is probably the St. Lawrence River, having a lot of fun. And it was around the 11th of that month that I ended up getting polio. And I know my dad used to take the last week of July and the first week of August. And so I've described that a little bit. And I'd like to go on to the next couple of slides on Thistletown. So Thistletown was the country branch of Sick Kids Hospital. And it originally they had some space on Toronto Islands at Hanlon's Point, and they wanted to expand. And so they looked for property, and they got this, I think it was a 90-acre property, and had a building put on it. And it looks rather intimidating. When I looked at the front of this, when I actually did a search to find out where was I during that time. And the other side of it, you'll see in a moment, is far more friendly, but they could accommodate 112 patients. And often they were there recuperating from other things in addition to polio, but eventually it was polio only. And, you know, by the 40s, that's what they were taking care of. And people were segregated by age and gender, and they're in large wards. So we'll go on to the next slide, if you would. And I want you to have a feel for the back of that building, because they called it the Palace of Sunshine. And I think that's really neat. And you can see here beds out this is actually outside, and above are balconies. And they were able to, in good weather, actually wheel people out of these wards onto their balconies to be able to experience the sunshine, which was so important. The picture in 1953, I actually found this on a magazine article that was on David Onnelly. He was probably there at the same time that I was, judging from the trees. It might have been a little earlier in spring, but usually polio was the thing that hit in the summer, and that parents really feared, you know, are we going to get through this summer without our kids having polio? So David is sitting in the wheelchair next to the police there, and it was a day where they came to visit, and they were doing a Western theme. So you see the kids dressed up in Western clothes, which are popular. Thank you. Here I am, a couple of pictures. My dad started a photography studio when I got polio, and I didn't know this until he had passed away, and I came across a letter he had sent to Farley Mowat, the author, because he had to pay for my operations. So he was, you know, using the camera off, obviously, at this point, and we all had to stay in bed. We weren't allowed to walk a lot. In fact, some people that were kind of forced to walk, you know, you just have a fever. One story that I heard about, the person actually died within a week of doing that. And so we were on a striker frame, as it's called, and on pieces of wood, so our heads were up. And the one on the right is one where I was speaking at Rotary. I was asked to speak on Polio Month, and during Polio Month, I should say, and I asked my father to come up and describe this because a friend had brought him to the lecture, and I thought, I'm going to talk about these things that haven't really a clue what's going on. I'm there, yes. And I asked him, and he said, well, we gave you this musical clown. There was a noise. Remember the red nose, and you would wind the nose up and the music would come out. So I'm listening to it, but I thought, how nice. But then he said, but your eyes were welling up with tears because we were just about to leave. And I never realized that my parents, when I was at Sick Kids, were not allowed to see me at all. When I came to Thistletown, they were only allowed in every 2 weeks for 2 hours. And so he said, your eyes were welling up. And as we left the building, the wailing and crying of children, because I would imagine a lot of the parents went at the same time. It was unbelievable. And he said, I don't think a parent should ever have to hear that. So our healthcare in many ways has changed, hopefully for the better, to be able to be nearer children when they are ill. Thank you. There's probably a lot more, but anyway, This was an interesting thing that I found pasted in the back of the photo album, and it was about me. We'll have her walking by Christmas. Happy words for Kathy and her folks. Different words from those Dad and Mommy had fearfully experienced since the disease hit. So there was all of this, you know, real fear as to whether or not I'd live, B, whether I'd ever walk again. And when my mother came home from the hospital from sick kids, I asked her about what she felt. She said, I don't remember, but I remember seeing your little shoes by the door. And I cried because I didn't know whether you would ever be able to walk again. And so this was the community chest, and it says, give the United Way. I'm not sure if it has a connection to today's United Way. It may. And this, some of what was in the papers at the time. Thank you. And then Marching Mothers. This is a huge, obviously, March of Dimes. You may not have heard of March of Dimes. Some people haven't, having been on the board for 13 years. I stepped down in July in order to concentrate on online teaching this fall, which I'm doing. And Marching Mothers started because they wanted to find a cure for polio. And it started in the United States, and then Canadians joined forces with them. And when they joined, it was interesting because it was the first time, it seemed, from what I had read on the March of Dimes in an article on one of their magazines, the first time that women went out to fundraise. It usually was a thing men did, but not necessarily the women. And the whole idea was they would all go out on the same night. They would let everyone know they were coming. They would ask people to turn on the lights on their porches, and they would be collecting dimes. And so the first one that took place in Canada was in 1955, I believe. I'm just going for the amount of money they raised. Yes, it was 1955, and they raised $77,000 collecting dimes. And this whole March of Dimes was coined by the entertainer, Eddie Cantor, who suggested the name because it was based on a song, Brother, Can You Spare Me a Dime, which was very popular in the Great Depression. Anyway, March of Dimes is still going in the States and in Canada, but they are separate organizations, just in case you're wondering if they're connected. Thank you. Go on to a little bit more, and I may mention more about what the March of Dimes does later on. The other thing is hope for eradication was huge. And so these dimes went towards research, and 1955, Jonas Salk's polio vaccine came out, and in 1960, the Savin, the live one that we used to get it, a little pink, something pink. Well, it was the vaccine in a pink liquid that they would put on sugar cubes and feed them to us at school. So we had both, but I remember the sugar more than anything. And currently, 2 out of the 3 wild polio strains are gone. And a lot of that has to do with Rotary International, because they are fighting so much to, fighting not people, but fighting hard to keep up that focus on eradicating polio. And in 2020, in terms of the wild polio vaccine, only 53 cases as of about a month ago were in Pakistan and 79 in Afghanistan. There are still some cases that happen with the vaccine, but this is exciting because we're getting close, and I'm hoping that we can say that we're free of it. Canada was free in 1994, which is not that long ago. Thank you very much. And so a little bit about March of Dimes. I'm not going to go into each one of these, but March of Dimes started for that search for a vaccine. After that, they decided to support people who had polio, and they did all kinds of things, raising money for vocational training, for help if they needed it at home, job placement, corrective surgery. I had the Easter seals as well, helping me with the corrective surgery, housekeeping, all kinds of things. They wanted to support people having had polio. And as that group of people age and pass away, and the need is there for information on post-polio that I'll talk about in a moment, But what is really neat and what I liked about the March of Dimes is that they help anybody, everybody, no matter what disability. So they are totally open to men, women, and now we're even helping children as well with conductive education, which helps to repattern brains. Why I bolded the after stroke program in this list is because of the fact it is the one that they're concentrating on a fair bit at this point, because there are so many people who have strokes. And of course, this is going to increase with our aging population. So there's lots of things there that you can check out if you're interested on their website. Thank you. I wanted just briefly to talk a little bit about post-polio syndrome, because it is something that hit me when I was 36. And so I'll talk a little bit more after the slides are down about that, but I wanted to show you what they believe is happening. So polio, when you see that, these came from Post-Polio Health International. They're part of about 12 slides. So if you want more information, you can go there and get it. But the virus would hit the anterior horn cell in the spine, and the yellow things here are nerves. So what happened, as you can see going from the first slide to the one on the right, that whole branch, that nerve branch, was destroyed. So if people had paralysis like I did, there are many of these branches that actually break off, they wither away. The polio recovery, if you look carefully at that main branch, you'll see that there's a new branch that came out from the main one that reinnervated the area. And a lot of the green areas that you see there are nerves working very hard, doing double duty. And they really, they're still doing research on what post-polio is, but they believe what happens is that those nerves that do double duty say, I've had enough, and they quit. And that's what happened to me when I was 36, which is in the fourth picture here. So practically, I'll mention in a moment, rather than talking just with this slide up. I think we're almost finished. We may have a couple more, and then we'll take the slides down. So post-polio syndrome, the cause is probably overuse, as I mentioned, and it usually happens 20 to 40 years later. For me and for many, new muscle weakness, joint weakness, general fatigue. A lot of people that experience this, and why I'm going through this is because you may again encounter someone who's had polio who's never heard of post-polio syndrome. And if there, no pain without gain was our motto in the 50s when we were recuperating. And if we keep going at that level, we can actually make the nerves die faster. And again, it is ongoing research that they're doing. But general fatigue, a wall of fatigue and exhaustion, muscle atrophy. So one of my muscles is quite smaller, and a lot of pain. Breathing or swallowing problems. If the person had bulbar polio and got out of the iron lung, a lot of them are going back into it. And sleep apnea would be a milder form of that. And a lot of people who've had polio feel that the rooms they're in are 10 degrees cooler than everyone else feels. There was one more thing I wanted to mention on this just before we go. I know what it was. The people that recuperated from polio, like after I had it, I was very active, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But the ones who are really, really active are the ones who tended to get post-polio syndrome more than those who perhaps had more paralysis and couldn't become active. And it may be because of that overuse. Thank you. And I think the last slide is this is the dime that you may have in your change if you ever are using money again. But in 2015, the International Year of the Volunteer was recognized by the Canadian Mint. And these women were the marching mothers, and the sun has to do with patenting the sun, and this had to do with the vaccine. So thank you very much, Tara, for doing that. I'm really happy to at least show you some pictures to put things into context. And I guess one thing that I wanted to go back to was, as a child, I don't remember ever being different, other than the fact I liked going to the hospital to have operations. I had several of them to transplant muscles and tendons. And the early ones were done by Dr. Mustard, who was famous for separating the hearts of Siamese twins. He went into heart operations. We were very much guinea pigs in terms of like they would take a muscle from one area and transfer it to another. They would lengthen tendons, they would cross them over, they would do all kinds of things to make sure that we could walk as well as we could by the end of this. And so, you know, I spent my early years, because we were talking about this in the class the other day, going to sick kids every 6 months, every 3 months first, every 6 months. And then I was really thrilled when I graduated to 18 months and 2 years. I had operations from the age of 2 until I was 17. And that was just the way it was. And quite frankly, I don't remember being quite different from my brothers. I skated, I was able to take ballet to try and strengthen my muscles as a kid. When I got tired, I certainly would limp a little bit, and people would say, "Did you hurt your leg?" "Oh no, I've had polio." One of them is larger, the other one is smaller. And most of the time I wear slacks these days because, you know, it's just more comfortable with the shoes I have to wear. But the biggest thing was, I think, when I hit age 36 and got post-polio syndrome, I was a fashion designer working for Parker's, going to Paris, London, Milan, Florence. I mean, my dream job. I went within a 2-year period into a scooter, and I couldn't climb stairs. I had to get chair glides. I had to use canes to get to the corner if I decided I could walk that far. And as a result of the March of Dimes funding some research, I wanted to say that I'm thrilled that I was able, there is no cure for post-polio, but I was thrilled to be able to wire myself up with electrodes, and still do 30 years later. And as a result of a study that I was part of, I was able to eventually give the scooter to the March of Dimes. I was able to walk downstairs with 2 garbage bags in my hands and feeling again like I'd licked polio a second time. Because when I was hired for my design job, my employer said, "Are you sure you can travel?" You know, like there was travel involved with this business. Do you have any problem with it? And I shared this story with the class and said, well, I wasn't sure what he was asking, because in the 70s, it wasn't always clear in the fashion industry. There was a lot of expectations, sexual favors, and that kind of thing. And I just said, as long as we have separate bedrooms, there's no problem. And I asked what he meant. You know, he had gotten out of his desk and was kind of sitting right above me on the corner of the desk when he asked that question. And I thought, oh my, so I have to put it straight right now. I'm not going to do anything untoward. Anyway, he wanted to know whether or not I could carry my own suitcase. And I vividly remember saying, I've licked polio. Absolutely, no problem. And so it was 14 years later when I had to say that I can't do any more of that travel, and was happy with this research that I was part of to give me something back. And the research with the electrodes that I do use, it helps with the muscles. It helps tone the muscles, and the before and after MRI showed that, but it will never help the nerves. And so I have to keep doing it. And as I age, I'm now using 2 canes, because the anterior horn cells in our spines, we all have those. We'll lose about 20% of those as we age. And they are the things that polio affected. And so as I age, I might find I'm going to have greater disability because perhaps they're still doing double duty. So it's been a life where polio has changed it dramatically many times, but through it all, I found that you overcome, and you have that attitude, a positive attitude of what's next and how am I going to get through this. And currently I'm teaching and running a business. I'm still doing an awful lot. But the psychological, I wanted to actually go through one more thing I forgot to mention the other day. And it's the "oh, poor me" psychological effect. So I mentioned I go back to Thistletown briefly. When parents could come in every 2 weeks for 2 hours, they were allowed to bring ginger ale and oranges, apparently. And that came from another person who was at Thistletown, who was 11 when he came in. And he happened to comment that the meals weren't that great, and his parents would sneak in a tuna fish sandwich. And if they got caught sneaking in food, whoa, it was not very positive. And so what was interesting was when I was about, I'm guessing 4 years old, 3, 4. In fact, it was connected to one of my operations. I'm not going to read you my operations, don't worry. I was 3. I went around the corner from the house where I was living. There was a big porch. So I got off the porch. I was able to walk with a cast on, probably a walking cast. And I sat on a huge stump that was around the corner. The tree had been cut down. And I'd wait for some people to come by. And as soon as someone approached me, I would be going, I'd hold on to my leg going, oh, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. And the man, my mother said it was a man, he'd pick me up. Where do you live, little girl? Oh, just around the corner. And so they take me around the corner and set me on the porch. And as soon as they were out of sight, where do you think I was? Back on the stump. I had run around the corner to sit on that stump. So I don't remember a lot that happened during that time, meaning while I was isolated, not seeing my parents very often. But I do know that oh, poor me sometimes will come up at times, and I have to make sure that I push it down. But boy, I was creative even at that point. And I did get a few people carrying me to the stairs, and then my mother found out what was happening and let me know that wasn't appropriate. I won't say how she did it. I don't know, but it's interesting, and I've overcome polio twice in some ways. And I know that it will continue to change my life forever as I move forward.